Okay, well, we're planting part of a little garden that is a gift from the class of 2008, New York University's class of 2008, and it's a native woodland garden in a very compressed space, about 2,000 square feet, and I think when we're finished, we'll have about 40 different species of plants, all of which were here before Henry Hudson arrived 400 years ago. Maybe not right here, but not far away. And so we're trying to bring back vegetation that has been sort of squeezed out through development and other sorts of pressures, and expose people on a daily basis to these plants that were here way before we were. Okay, well, these are plants that would have grown in for the most part, the upland forest in New England, in the New York region, again, before settlers arrived. We have a lot of ferns. We have Christmas fern, interrupted fern, hay-scented fern, which provides sort of the backbone of the planting, and then lots of flowering species, woods phlox and wild geraniums and columbines and blue-eyed grass. Okay, here we're in the process of planting hay-scented fern, the lacy fern there, which will grow in quite a lot of light. And then this is a little group of Pennsylvania sedge, the grass-like plant, and we're about to plant some woods phlox, which will have a blue flower. Then we have a drift of wild columbine, which has a coral pink flower in the spring. There's wild geranium, which has a lavender flower in the spring. So this will have a lot of flowering in the spring, less flowering later in the season, because in the native forest there simply aren't as many things blooming later in the season. This gives you a little. George has a hay-scented fern. Again, these grow in big drifts in semi-sunny areas in the woods, little openings, places that are not quite such deep shade, and they mass really well. They often form big groups in the forest. But interspersed among them there are the asters and phlox and geraniums. But the ferns have design-wise, are really important here, in that they tie things together. The broadleaf flowering things are sort of held together by the mass of ferns. Little dots for each of the different plant species, and shows.
How many are you talking about?
We've got about 2,000 plants, and we have a list of the species on this sheet. So again, about 40 species and a total of almost 2,000 plants. We did plant some trees. The small trees here are amelanchier or shadblow, which will have white flowers in April. But the emphasis is on the ground layer, the forest floor, and again, it's based on the native forest, but it's obviously stylized a bit with concentrations of different species. Just a real fun project to work on, to work out the intricacies and the complexities of the patterns. All of the species in here, again, were native. They've lived in this region for 10,000 years on natural rainfall, and so irrigation should be minimal. We do have a drip irrigation system in place in case we run into dry periods, but for the most part it should be fairly self-sustaining. While there's still open soil between the plants, there will be less weed problem because it is so shady.
Okay.
Many of our worst weed pests are agronomic or agricultural weeds that grow in full sun that were introduced over time. So weeding will be less and less over time as the native species fill in the blank spaces.
First.
I'm George Reyes. I'm the head gardener here at NYU. And we're working today on our native woodland garden here in Schwartz Plaza next to the library.
Tell me a little bit about the plantings.
So we're using a plant list. We're using a design from Darrell Morrison, who's a very famous landscape architect who pioneered the combination of ecological plantings with very beautiful, high aesthetic standards. And so we're using plants that we believe, according to the Mannahatta project, were here at the time of European settlement. So we planted Amelanchier canadensis trees here in the spring, and we're underplanting with about almost 40 species of herbaceous plants that are native not just to the region, but actually native to Manhattan Island. So that's what makes the project kind of special, not a typical city gardening project. It's about 2,200 square feet in total, but for Greenwich Village, it's actually quite large. So we're taking, NYU has lots of small green spaces, and we really need to maximize. Our aim is to maximize their use, to kind of make them multitask, since we have so many small green spaces like this one. So this one will be attractive, but we also want it to be available for teaching, research, community service. So over the next year, now that we have the structure of the garden in place, we'll have students, faculty, community members helping us fill in with some of the more obscure plants, some of the smaller numbers of plantings that will go in to fill in the garden. So I would say for New York City, it's a fairly sizable garden. We're not under the illusion that we'll be able to bring back the native ecology of Manhattan Island, but we're going to be evoking a native woodland, a native Manhattan woodland, using the species in a very stylistic way, using the species that were here 400 years ago when Henry Hudson arrived in Manhattan. I think one of the things that's going to be interesting about this project is to see how natives work in a very urban environment. This is really, we're not just planting a garden that's going to look nice for people to look at, but we want to learn from this garden. We want this to be available to our faculty and students as an urban ecology project to sort of learn what are the native plants that work best here in the city. These are plants that evolved in this region, so they're already adapted to our soils, to our climate. We're not going to use any chemicals, certainly, to keep these plants looking good. We've used no fertilizer here. Everything just goes right in. The only thing we did was we enriched the soil with plenty of compost. It's a high organic matter soil. There is irrigation here. The plants need water just for the first year. And then the plan is, after the first year when the plants are established, the plants will be on their own. And we'll expect them to kind of fend for themselves to get the water that they need. And we'll only do supplemental watering in periods of extreme drought. Now, we can't imagine a drought. This year we've had so much rain, but eventually there may be a year, maybe when we go weeks and weeks without rain, we may need to turn on the drip irrigation, which delivers water right to the roots.